Yep.
So my name is Christine Rosenberg. I'm part of the customer onboarding team. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us today when we are going to do a little deep dive into the Neo optimization module. So before we do that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Neo in general. So hopefully, as you know, Neo is our new user interface. We will be shutting down Classic by the end of the year is the plan. So we hope that you have started your process to transition over to the new interface. So why are we doing this? We know that change is hard, but we see that Neo is the future. We have worked a lot as far as performance is concerned. So Neo is very fast. Neo is very user-friendly. There's also been a lot of design work around trying to make fewer clicks in the system, and again, the user-friendliness. There's brand new concepts that we've built in also around access rights, base schedules, and also a lot of improvement around our forecasting, which you'll see here in the session today. So with that, quick introduction about Neo, I will hand over to my colleague, Ben.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. Welcome. So my name is Ben. I am one of the hosts today on the left-hand side. Like Chris, I'm part of the Quinix customer onboarding team, specifically a solution designer, but working within the team here based in the UK, if you can't tell by the accent. Also hosting today to help with the Q&A towards the end of this session today. We also have Stefan Hale, product owner for Quinix, or one of the product owners for Quinix, and specifically for the forecast part of Neo and what we're going to be running through today. So you've got both of us on the line. We have an hour and a half today booked out. What we will do, you'll notice obviously you're all muted currently. What we'll do through this is talk and then open up the Q&A for questions at the end. So if you do have any questions throughout this, if you can just post them into that chat, that would be perfect, and then we can go through those at the end. Of course, if there isn't time to cover all of the questions, or there's need to come back on some of the answers, we can always take those away with us. If you've noticed already, we're also recording the session, so we can refer back to this if you do need to do that at a later date. Okay. So we'll stick on the slide decks to start with, and I'll just go through a few overviews, and then we'll actually be doing a live demonstration of some of the key functions to run through that for you. So the agenda for the hour, first off, an introduction to optimization at Quinix. What is it? How does it work? And how do we view that word, optimization? The differences or how that then relates to what you've previously been using, budget and forecast in the classic module. So some things have grouped together, some things have changed, but fundamentally the same modules that we're talking about now. We'll go through a comparison of Classic versus Neo, what the differences are between those two interfaces when you talk about forecasting, but also then the difference in terms of the abilities or the things that you can do where within the system. We'll then talk about a fundamental part of use of this module, which is the integrations, how you get data into the system and where you post that data or where you can then retrieve that data. Both explaining for any current integrations that you have and also for new integrations that need to be built. We'll then do a demo, like I said, so we'll go through the Neo interface. Just got a dummy retail store just to go through, just to show you where all of that work with regards to the integrations and data flow goes, and how then the end user can use that in alongside their schedules and their time punches, and measuring the success. We'll then get into a bit of the configuration side, so how you set up variables in Neo, how you can then set up your algorithms, how we then configure staffing, optimal staffing. And if you are familiar with classic forecasting, that is much like when we were configuring rules for creation of shifts, so setting your optimal staffing levels. Then just a quick overview after you've had a chance to digest that, what steps to take next. Obviously, we know we've got a mixture of different people here that know the varying levels, also then using Quinix in different ways. So we've tried to capture each of the different variations of use of the system. And then right at the end, like I said before, we will have a Q&A. So if we can add those questions to the chat, you should have a Q&A bubble with the speech bubbles in Zoom. So please do post your questions there and we'll get to them in the last half hour of today's session. Okay. Good. So first off, into an introduction to optimization at Quinix. So as you know, or as I've already mentioned, when we say optimization, we're combining a few different concepts with regards to forecasting and budgeting, but ultimately we're also then talking about the same thing. So the aim of that optimization, or also known as forecasting, is to gain control of the various budget variables and introduce increased control of staff costs. So again, within the system, within the schedule views, etc., the ability to be able to see cost of those shifts, those planned shifts and actual punches, comparing that against budgets or forecasted spend, allow you to then review the actual outcomes, define and create sales and staffing budgets based on that historical data. So allowing you to use Quinix to react to what has happened, therefore moving scheduling decisions to database decisions over and instead of decisions made by schedulers based on the experience. So it's obviously combining those two things, taking the experience of the person creating the schedule with the data to make those intelligent scheduling choices. Then allowing to use that same data to predict future needs, but also to define and tweak the optimal staffing levels based on this data. So again, when we talk about forecasting, a lot of that is all about the numbers, but the main drive of this is to then create an optimal schedule to ensure that the people that you are scheduled are there at the right time based on the forecasted needs of the unit or the store in the example that I'll go through. In context of that, we've got a few different focus areas here at Quinix with the transition for Neo. So some of these things will be familiar if you have attended previous transition webinars. The main focus areas for this part for Neo forecasting, first one on the left-hand side there for streamlining the workforce management process. Previously, we had numerous steps within the classic interface to create forecast. One of the main focus areas that we are driving at with the creation of Neo forecast or Neo optimization is to reduce the amount of time, the amount of clicks spent to produce that same number. Then using in a more intelligent way the application to identify and suggest those optimizations. So where should the shifts be in relation to my schedule to allow me to then adjust that schedule and ultimately have a better way of working with regards to the data and ensuring people are in the right place. And then the last point there, connecting Quinix to the world, allowing data flow in and out of Quinix, allowing the choices to be made within the system, but also bringing in external sources of data to, again, make choices with regards to the schedules that are created within the system. Again, not to read through everything that's on this slide, but just a couple of key pointers again as general points. Obviously, our overall aim is to create an intelligent workforce management system using AI and machine learning to drive that optimization. That all comes from the surrounding items with identifying trends and anomalies, generate automated forecasts for the business drivers, decisions to be made on those business drivers, allowing the system to learn how users act and to either automate or to shorten and make those tasks as simple as possible. And then the final step there, bottom left, with regards to assistant and suggested actions to allow Quinix to drive the behavior of the users based on previous actions, historical data, etc. Now, obviously, that's kind of the overall aims. How we get there and how we are building this up within Neo Forecast is a journey. As you know, the Neo transition as a whole is a journey where we're building specific items to allow for the use of the system. And therefore, I wanted to just put this on screen just to give you an indication of where we are, what we have so far, and what you can utilize within Neo. So as you said, it is a journey, that top part being the Quinix assistant that we talked about. But in order for us to get there, we have to build the foundations of this. So if we start down here at the bottom right, the first part of this is the actual forecast data. The ability to present forecasts to a local manager within their schedule view for them to edit or have as a context when scheduling. So in the simplest sense, when we talk about optimized scheduling, it is the presentation of that data to the user, unedited data or data from other systems. Over and above that, the next step in that is to then allow for the definition of what is optimal staffing. So based on what is being inputted with regards to forecast data, what is the then associated level of staffing needed in order to deliver that forecast. So if we take a practical example there, when we talk about rules for creation of shifts within Classic, we're talking about, for example, the number of people needed in order, or number of shifts, sorry, needed in order to deliver, say, 100 euros worth of sales in the hour. Sales being one of the examples for a variable. That then allows us to, again, within the schedule, present the data from the forecast and then say, based on that forecast data, what is the optimal staffing level? Above and beyond that, if I know how many people I need per hour or per 15 minutes, which is or 5 minutes, which is one of the changes that we'll be introducing or have introduced with Neo Forecasting, actual creation of that schedule. So the next step in that journey is, now that we have all of that data, create the shifts, unassigned shifts without the employees associated, using the rules for optimal staffing and also combining other rules associated with shifts, for example, for breaks, etc. So then I can actually auto schedule, or as previously, if you have been using Forecast in Classic, that would be for the review generated shifts, the far right-hand side tab within Classic Forecast. So generating the shifts based on the work that is done below. The next step over here on the left is then auto manning. So again, if you're used to the Classic terminology, if you have been using man shifts in Quinix, that is a function that allows you to populate the shifts that are empty within a specific time frame. So therefore, I've created my shifts from my optimal staffing, which comes from my forecast, and I have my employees ready. They have their rankings, they have their agreements or their contracts assigned, and they have their availability set. Therefore, populate those schedules with the employees that I have available within my schedule. And then, as I mentioned right at the beginning, the final step on that is to be able to give users assistance when scheduling and handling daily tasks. Obviously, we all know that there is far more that goes into workforce management other than the actual schedule creation. So it's then allowing or assisting the local managers or the schedulers with decisions for their schedules that they are creating. So like I said, there's a few different steps to this. Where we are now and what I will demonstrate will be these first two parts of this pyramid, the actual data itself and getting data into Quinix and how to do that if you are moving from classic forecast into Neo forecast, and then how that optimal staffing is built. I will hint at auto scheduling and auto manning, but today we won't be going into detail on that today. So with regards to the differences, just before we hop into the demo, I've alluded to some of this already, but the key differences for you to take away from today. The first one being that we have, with the building of Neo forecast, allowed for the introduction of lower than 1 hour increments. So when we are configuring or setting up your forecast variables in Neo, we are able to set that up on 5, 15-minute, 30-minute, or 60-minute increments. It came from various different requests to allow for that. So if you are currently using Classic and you are using hourly based data, but you have, say, 30, 15, or 5-minute data available, we can actually make that move now with this transition to allow you to insert that lower level details, which was previously not possible. We are also allowing for original forecast values to be maintained when enabling edit. Again, if you're familiar with Classic forecast, when edits were completed within that forecast within Classic, those edited values were removed and you could no longer see the previous value. Again, with this, what we have allowed for is for of course, the editing of forecast value, but the original being maintained. And I'll show you that when we go into the demonstration, both edits based on the percentage variance or also an edit based on the fixed value. We've also moved the forecast editing into the schedule view. So what you are now able to do is to, rather than navigate away from your schedule to edit a value within a forecast tab in Classic, it actually is now presented within statistics along the bottom line, which is able to be viewed alongside your schedule, but also then edited from there. With this new functionality, we've also brought in the use of third-party forecast providers. Again, previously our API was allowed you to post data here. What we're pushing towards is also the use of third-party forecast providers in a better way. And we have some existing partners who are providing these services. And again, if we'd like to discuss that, that could be a follow-up to this session. It also allows us to build on the available algorithms. So when we say algorithms with regards to forecasting in Classic, we're talking about use of last year's historical data, 6 weeks trend, so last 6 Mondays, for example, and also then copying from previous periods with a percentage increase. So we were limited really to those algorithms. What we are able to do with Neo forecasting is introduce new algorithms, more intelligent algorithms to achieve what we've previously discussed, to allow for the accuracy of that forecasting to be improved. Create a more intuitive overview compared to the current views in Classic. Feedback from that module and from those tabs was with of course, the data is there if you know where to find it. One of the overall aims that I've talked about already today, and I'm sure if you've attended other sessions, you would have heard it said also, one of the overall aims for Neo is a simpler user interface, a more intuitive interface for the users. So again, bringing and making more intuitive overview. Of course, if you are new to Classic or relatively new to Classic, I'm sure you remember how steep that learning curve is when you first get into using that module. Again, hopefully you'll see when we go through that in detail, it's a lot simpler and a lot more digestible as a new user also. And the last point there with regards to security, we'll talk about integrations a bit more, but we will, introduced use of REST API for posting, getting, deleting data from Neo Forecast, and we'll talk a bit more about that. So when we talk about getting data in, again, we will go through what this looks like at when we actually get the data in. But with regards to what data is posted and how to post it, I just wanted to talk very quickly about integrations and where the data will go. Some of you will be familiar with this slide. It's not new. It is very much similar to how we have presented this previously when we talk about data decisions and what data is needed when we use forecasting. So if I take the top example, as with Classic Forecast, we can also post data as actual historical data. So let's imagine, take the sales as an example, or the traffic footfall example. That raw data can be posted to Quinix as historical data. When I look at that journey then within these arrows along the middle, we are then able to forecast within Quinix using that historical data. And currently the available algorithm is one that you'll be familiar with if you're using Classic, which is the last year plus X%. One of the first things we're doing is actually, or have done, sorry, is to automate this. A lot of clicks were being done in order to generate this first version of the forecast. So one of the big steps and major points of this is to actually reduce that number of clicks, like I said. So we are able to then produce that forecast automatically or based on a fixed value of percentage increase. That then follows this journey that we've talked about already on this session today, but that then gives me my forecast number. I then use my productivity rules or my optimal staffing levels, or if you're used to Classic terminology, my rules for creation of shifts, which gives me my optimal staffing number, and then ultimately allowing me to manually schedule, use the base schedules or fixed schedules, or and that last point there, the automated schedule creation, to get my final schedule. So that's kind of the first data flow, starting with raw data through Quinix forecasting all the way through to my final schedule. The alternative is if you are on this call today and you have an outside data warehouse, BI tool, or forecasting tool, you are also able to input into Quinix the forecast value itself. So rather than have Quinix forecast for you, post a forecast value to Quinix directly. Again, we then join that same journey, cutting out the historical data in the forecast side, and then creating productivity rules, optimal staffing, and ultimately my schedule. Of course, you can combine those two just to make sure everyone is aware. You can, of course, post actual data to be viewed in the system, but not actually forecast on it. So you can have both actual data and forecast data from external systems if you wanted to do that. And then the last number here with regards to BI data warehouse and forecast tool, also posting what is the optimal staffing number. So again, cutting later into the process, but posting then what is my optimal staffing number on a 5, 15, 30 or 60 minute level. So a couple of things to consider, again, just to make sure everyone is aware, nothing changing on that ability to post data at different points in that process there. So with regards to that, one of the big changes that we've mentioned already today is the change of where that data is. So if you are currently using Classic forecasting and you are posting data to Classic with the SOAP API, the first thing that we will need to do is actually post that data to Neo Forecast. That, like I mentioned earlier on, is using the REST API. I've got links, etc., and guidance on the screen now. Not expecting you guys to take that away from here, but just to give you a very quick overview, we are moving to REST API, like I said, but we are then with that for posting of data, deleting data, or getting data for Neo Forecast, we will then actually need to be using a client ID and secret. So that client ID and secret then authorizes those actions through the API. If you are the support contact and you want to obtain those details, if you contact support at Quinix, we are able to provide you with those details to start posting that data. So like I said, we have new API documentation. It's hosted or posted to Swagger. So if you're used to our API documentation, that's hosted in Drive. I will point out this is also all written out on our help docs page. Again, helpful links and where to find that is part of this deck. So when, as part of the follow-up, we can provide you with those links. Or if you just go to help docs and search for REST, it will be the first option that comes up when you search there. So there is a bit of technical difference. We are displaying some of the data from Classic in Neo, but ultimately there will need to be a transition of any integrations, or if you're building new integrations, that should be pointed at the REST API. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pause there for a second to switch over to Neo and then show you where that ultimately ends up when we talk about data. So hopefully you can all see Neo now. I'm just going to be using a demonstration retail demo that is tried to be as generic as possible. I understand we have various different kinds of vertical customer, etc. on the line now. So please take what you're seeing with a pinch of salt. It's not all designed to be exactly how your use will be, but hopefully by me going through this in this way, it will cover a lot of the cases that we are talking about today. So when we are in Neo, so this first page that we get to, also the schedule view, looks very much similar to what you were used to, but one key thing missing with regards to the statistics. So in the top here, we have display and statistics. When I click that, helps if I refresh. I've been sat on that page for quite some time, so let me just do a quick refresh. Okay, let's try that one again. So when I do display and statistics, I then get this bottom bar down at the bottom here. This then allows me, with this pen on the right-hand side, to select what data I want to view. Much as you did in Classic, you have then the statistics available. So if you were looking to view scheduled hours or perhaps worked hours, these statistics are available to view in a sums or totals. So I can see scheduled hours, worked hours as a grid that will provide me with the weekly total in this view, alongside then the daily totals. If I click into a single day, I would then see the hourly totals with the day totals on the left-hand side. And also then as a graphical view. So when I switch between days and weeks, for example, here, I can then view all of these statistics along the bottom as a graphical view. I'm just showing you the first set of hours, which are broken down here. I can then also see sales and costs. These sales and costs is what I alluded to earlier, which is where I can see some of the classic variables displayed in Neo. So just to make sure everyone's aware, if you currently have not started exploring these options, but you are posting data to Classic as sales data, for example, you are able to view that within this interface. So just to let you know, to point out on the deck that I have put together here, there is a bit more guidance here. So these top sections, in effect, hours, sales and costs, are related to Classic forecast values. But when we talk about the Neo forecast values, we then get into this optimal headcount and then my forecast variables down here. When I click into those forecast variables, I can then start to see various different items here. So when I click in, I have three options. I have the sales, which is the overall variable. I have my sales forecast, and I have my actual, and I then have my budgets. So what this allows you to do, as I was saying earlier on, we have a forecast provided based on historical data. We then have our actual data. So at the moment, obviously, yesterday's data is blank in this example, but you can then see if I go back 1 week, for example, the differences for the actual versus the sales forecast. In this particular example, it's very accurate. That's just the dummy data that I have entered into the system for purposes of this demonstration. So for each of the variables that you have or want to use within your business, we can add those as variables to Neo. So if I click into, for example, footfall, I can also then see historical footfall, or actually my footfall forecasting as well. Or in this particular example, I also have interactions as a variable. May well be that we also then want to forecast on the interactions. The key difference between Classic and forecast here being that within Classic, if you are familiar with the schedule view, much of this was a fixed way of working, which you configured on a unit level to view, for example, optimal headcount, to view the sales forecast, etc. With this, what it allows us to do is allow the user that is working in Neo to select what they want to see. So if I am working, I'm only interested in my interactions, my sales forecast, I can select to only see the sales forecast. And if I then take that chance to then look at the optimal headcount, I could then view what my optimal headcount is for sales forecast versus what is actually scheduled. So these graphical views and table views then allow you to compare in this view, in this graph, how I have scheduled, so being the blue line, compared to what I am forecasted to do with regards to optimal headcount. So as a reminder here, I'm looking at what is the optimal headcount when I look at my sales forecast. So in this particular example, I have created an optimal headcount based on sales data, and therefore comparing how I have scheduled these shifts above in comparison to how I should be scheduled. And when we look at these graphical views, I can then hover to compare how I have scheduled versus how I have how I was expected to schedule based on what is optimal. If we then take a look at the editing example, just to show you, within the table view, this is then where I am able to edit. So if I was to come into sales and sales forecast, I'm then looking at the total numbers for each of these weeks, each of these days, sorry, and also with the week total. You'll notice one thing over here on the right hand side, that 3228 has an underline, and also then the 969235 over here on the left hand side also has an underline. That is showing me that an edit has been done. And as you probably saw, when I hovered over that line, it will then show me what the previous value was. And this feeds into what I was alluding to earlier on, is that the first forecast has been created based on last year's data, but we allow managers to then make these edits directly within the system. Like I said, clicking onto that edit to allow me to edit that value. So clicking and allow me to edit that based on, say, a percentage increase. And when I hit save, you'll see that this number is now underlined also, and I can then see the original value held there. So original value being 6978. And as I then, if I wanted to continue editing those numbers, I will always maintain the original value. So if I hit save there, you'll see that the 678.2 is maintained there within that value. So again, just to compare and contrast against Classic, rather than moving away from the schedule view to make edits such as this, you're able to make those edits directly within this schedule. And over here on the left-hand side, just to be sure, just to cover all bases, if I was, for example, in a day view, of course, I can make those edits on an hourly level, or if I was working in 15-minute brackets, I would also be able to see those broken down. But I can also then make that change over here on the left-hand side as the total. So I can also change the total day value or the specific hour, in the same way that if I wanted to, I could also make a change to the week value rather than the specific day value. Those statistics, of course, again, there's a lot of things that you can do. This is just designed to give you a quick overview. And just one pointer on that is that when we talk about editing historic data, unfortunately at the moment that's not something that you can do. So if I was to want to change this, you are not able to edit in the past. Okay? So just to make sure that everyone is aware of that. It will only be future values that you can edit the forecast for. And the most important thing is that I am only editing the sales forecast or the forecast values. I'm not editing actuals or editing budgets in here. So if you were posting the budget or the actual data, that is data that the user in this interface cannot change. They are only able to change the sales forecast in this particular example, so only posted forecast values. Again, there's a few other options in here. What we're seeing in here, of course, is all controlled through configuration. So if you're wondering how we get to that point, that will be the next part that I get onto, how you actually display it. There's just one last thing to show on this, which is important to point out. Within the schedule and time, within base schedule, when you are also then creating or editing base schedules, you also have the option to display statistics here. So if you didn't know, what you can then do with that is actually display statistics from a specific week. So if you are forecasting into the future, creating base schedules, this will actually allow you to display the forecast and display the optimal staffing as well within the base schedule. So worth pointing out, it's both within the schedule and also within the base schedule. Okay, so how do I get to display statistics in this way? There's a few different configurations we need to do. They're very similar to what we do within Classic, but I'm going to take this chance now to run through that and show you with the configuration in detail. Within this deck that we have here, we have some guidance of this configuration, but just to point everyone in the right direction, this is also held in the help docs articles on forecast. So if you are wanting to, from here, look at what setups needed based on what your next steps are, we do have that guidance there. So the first thing is to set up your actual variables. So like I said, because we have moved or repositioned the forecasting values, the variables need to be recreated. So if you are the system admin, within your drop down at the top here, you have account settings. Within account settings down the bottom left hand side, if you have forecast enabled, you will have forecast with variables and configuration. So I will start with variables. This will then show you, I have some already here, which I've already been talking about today. We have the sales, the interactions, and the footfall. But when I add new, I then have the different options over here on the right hand side. Creating a name, this is the name that will display within the schedule view as well. So worth seeing, for example, the name for sales, interactions, and footfall is over here on the left hand side. That's the name that's entered here. The resolution, as I've talked about already, we have options now. So 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 or 60. It's worth noting as well, it does say here, it's not possible to edit that at a later date. So if we make sure that when you're adding these, you add the right granularity. A description, a type, again, these types cannot be changed at the moment after you have set it, but it is something that we are going to be using in the future for grouping of these variables. So it is important that you select the right type here. So for example, if we're dealing with sales, is it net or gross? If we are talking about footfall, guests, transactions, units, etc., just to make sure that that is selected in the right way. We then also have an external ID. So the external ID is one that previously we have set for you. When you create a variable in Quinix, it creates automatically a variable ID. In this new forecast, you are able to set that ID. So with regards to building integrations, etc., that is now the opportunity to match those IDs with your other systems also. So some simple setup when we first get that. But once you've got that set up, we then have your variables available. The next step then allows me to set up my configuration. So the configuration is with regards to the forecasting that will be done. In this particular example, if I just come into edit, I'm going to look at my sales forecast. In this example, I set up the name. The name is what is appearing within the statistics here. So just to show you that within here, the forecast variables, the name is the name of the variable that I just set up, which is sales. When I click there, the name that appears here is the name that I have given my configuration. So if I wanted to call this something else, I didn't like the fact that it said sales and then sales forecast, I would actually make that change within the configuration here. So you can see here the name sales forecast is coming from that name. But within that setup, like I said, we are building out our algorithms as we speak. We have within this settings, we have the options to set external IDs, set colors for the graphs. So you probably noticed my sales was a lovely shade of purple. You can edit the coloring there also. You also then have settings for which variable that's related to and what algorithm you want to use. So like I said, the first and most popular one from Classic we've taken is the last year same day to take, for example, the nearest Monday, Wednesday it is today, so the nearest Wednesday, so 15th of April, it would not be the 15th of April 2019 that I would be looking at. I would be looking at the nearest Wednesday, so Wednesdays for Wednesdays, not dates for dates. Plus then a modifier, so I would be taking the same values from last year with a 10% increase in this particular example. You'll also notice in this drop down, we also have then a forecasting, Quinix forecasting algorithm. That's something that we released or added recently, and we will be adding more to that algorithm to actually forecast not only taking last year's data, but various other variables. And if we want to talk anything more about that, I'll leave that with Stefan towards the end. But at the moment, this is all relatively new, but this Quinix forecasting algorithm will be where we are aiming to come in the future. And as we build out those algorithms, that will be displayed within this drop down here. So in that example, I've got my variables added, I've got my configuration added. So again, much like you have done previously within Classic, add the variables and also then add the configuration. What that means is that the user does no longer need to click to use last year's data. The system will do that if that is what is configured within here. So rather than the user going to a forecast tab, clicking to generate it, it will be done automatically. The next part of this is then at a local level. So within the dropdown again, within group settings, you then have forecast also appearing here. So just to show you the difference, account settings has forecast variables and configuration, but within a local level, so I'm then looking specifically at the Switzerland store, I want to look at the dynamic rules and the static rules. So this will be very similar to what you are used to if you have been using the rules for creation of shifts within Classic. This allows me to say what amount per hour of any one of my variables, on which weekday, between which time, what shifts do I need, or how many of the shifts do I need. So here, it's a very simple linear example. I've taken that I need every 10 euros worth of sales, I add an extra shift. And then when I start to get into the higher levels, it then starts to plateau where we then have 9 shifts needed per hour for 150 euros worth of sales. Again, just an example. But just to show you the flexibility here, we've added in more flexibility compared to what you previously used to. It's no longer about an amount and the hours. It's more about it's also, sorry, about the weekdays and the time. So this actually allows you to set, for example, I need 10, but between on these specific days, if it is only for the weekend, I'm able to configure that for Saturdays and Sundays between, let's say, well, leave it there as midnight, I'm able to say that 10 sales results in 2 additional shifts, let's just say extra shifts here. So allowing a better control of the weekday, which was previously only the amount and the number of shifts needed. So then, for example, I could set here that that's between the hours of 10 and 22. I need those additional shifts. Outside of that time, it would not be needed. And then just the last point on here to show you is that we have the dynamic rules. So this is the flexible rules based on the amount of the variable. So I have 20, therefore I need 1 shift. We also then have the static rules, the things that must happen regardless of level of the variables that we're talking about. So much like opening, closing shifts, etc., you are also then able to add static rules for the amount of shifts that are needed. So again, setting start and end times, which days of the week that is relevant to, how often that repeats, and start and end times to that. So combining is able then, to combine a static rule, again, my simple example of a retail environment, the static rule controlling the opening and closing shifts, and the dynamic rules controlling the shifts during the day, those shifts being the flexible or dynamic shifts that can be created. So with that being said, like I mentioned, all of that is outlined in the help docs. I realize that's just a really quick overview, but there is minimal setup that needs, or minimum setup that needs to be done in order to start utilizing that. 1, to create the variables. 2, to configure the forecast. 3rd step, to set up the dynamic rules to give me my optimal headcount. Create any static rules if you have any. So again, these are detailed descriptions of what each of these fields are if you would like to revisit these afterwards. And then the last part of that is then getting data in. So there is a bit of setup that is going to be, needs to be done within Classic, and that is setting up the IDs for your units or for your sections. So just as a quick recap, when we're talking about posting data to Neo, we need to know the IDs for the variables, of course, but also then which store or which unit that data will be going to. So within Classic, within settings and within tables, there is some configuration needs to be done to set up integration keys. So those integration keys would need to be done for the unit and or the sections if you're looking to forecast or post data at a section level. So there's setup that needs to be done to create the type for unit, but also then create the actual integration key. So in that example there, I've just given the ID 1234 to that unit. So that setup does need to be done also. But as we get into this and as you investigate the integration options and how that data is posted, that information is all again within the Help Docs articles to help you guide through that setup that's needed. With that being said, drawing close to the hour, I do want to allow for a lot of questions. I appreciate there's probably going to be quite a few. There's quite a lot covered in the last hour, but just to cover the last part, which is what do I do from here? So we've obviously got, like I said, a few different people online now looking at this and wondering what do I need to do next? Just to run through those quick options. So the first one is that if you are on this webinar and you have Forecasting Classic that is maintained by a partner, Connect My Apps, we have a standard solution for that. We can move or assist you in moving that over. If you have Forecasting Classic and you are currently or about to transition to Neo, the first thing that we need to do is to start posting that forecast data into Neo, either as well or as a replacement to what is done in Classic. Again, documentation and links there for the relevant endpoints to post that data. If you have Forecast in Classic and this is the first time you're thinking about this transition or listening to someone from Quinix talk about the transition, the first thing is to do exactly as you're doing today, start the journey, get in contact with us with regards to transitioning and how to go about that. Like I said, there is a lot of information about the transition on various web pages, which I'm sure you have seen if you've joined today, but just to make sure, again, we explain that that's all there. And also, if you are using Neo but using Classic forecasting, as I alluded to earlier, you can view some of your data in Neo from Classic. But again, the first thing we need to do is actually move the data over or start sending that data through the REST API endpoint. Again, either as a replacement to what you are doing in Classic or sending data to both systems in the short term during this transition period. So that concludes everything that was to be run through today. Again, appreciate that's a lot of information, a lot of configuration points that we've covered today. I wanted to make sure that those of you that have had a chance to explore it or read the documentation had more information, and those of you that this is all new to, hopefully that beginning part of today gave a good overview of the differences, where we are going with Neo forecasting and what's possible today. Okay, so within Help Docs, if you're not familiar with it, within here, if I come here, the first thing I've talked a lot about today is using this to find guidance on the REST API. So the first thing here, if you search REST, you will then see the first part, which is the REST API intro. So this will give you a bit more guidance on getting started with posting data. Like I said, is the main change for a lot of this transition is to start posting data. Then within Neo tab over here on the left-hand side, we then have a forecast section. So within Neo over here on the left, forecast, we then have everything that I've talked about with regards to setup. So if I just click on, let's say the first one, the forecast variables, you'll see written by Stefan, guidance on setting up your forecast variables, setting up the configuration, the dynamic rules, etc., and how and also examples of how to work with daily budgets as well. So there is more guidance here on how to work with this over and above what we've talked about today. So definitely worth having a read if you're not, if you haven't had a chance to.
I think that's a bit where we are today. Ben mentioned we are starting with the algorithm, and that's something that we will continue to work on throughout the years to make even better predictions to start with.
Great. So yeah, I don't think there's any more questions. I see quite a few people have dropped off now, so I think maybe we can wrap it up there, unless there's anything more to add or questions. So thank you all very much for joining.